All right, women's hockey fans, are you ready for phase 4? What even happened in phase 2 and 3? Are there some side deals going on? Who's going to play for Seattle? We've got all of that and more on today's episode of At Even Strength. This is our women's hockey podcast as part of Black Rosie Media. It's your all access pass to WoHo from the ice of the PWHL, the NCAA, and of course, international hockey. We've got everything for you here. On today's episode, we're going to go over what we saw as far as signings in phase 2 and 3. We'll let you know what's coming up for phase 4. And then we do have some coaching hires, some coaching changes, some coaching vacancies still ahead of the draft, which Black Rosie Media, more specifically Rachel Donner, will be at At Even Strength. So Rachel, let's get into this. Let's go, since phase 2 and 3 was really all about the expansion teams for the most part, and them being able to get some players together. Why don't we just run through what we saw in the phases so far and where all of these teams are as we go into the next phase 4, starting tomorrow as of this recording.
Yeah, it's interesting because some teams have signed more players than others, and some teams have like an even distribution of like forwards, defense, goaltending. Some don't. Some utilize the EFOs, some didn't. So I think all of that is really fascinating at the end of this third phase here. And then, as a side issue, we'll talk about the existing teams and how they utilize protection. But I think in terms of Detroit, you look at they are the only expansion team without a goaltender right now. They've used 7 of their 10 starter slots, I guess you could call it. They won't fill more slots until the open phase later, because phase 5 is going to be for existing teams, but they should fill up by the end of phase 4, which is what they're supposed to do. But real interesting mix of players for Detroit. I think, for Sirens fans, the biggest heartbreaker for them is Taylor Gerrard signing there. But of course, she's from there, so it kind of made sense, right?
And I totally forgot that as we were talking about it. Like, I just got my hopes up because I just really like her in New York. But yeah, that made a lot of sense. But I completely forgot she's from that area.
Yeah, yeah. But I think the other interesting thing is that obviously, we talk about Daryl Watts signing there. They did use the EFO on her, and she signed the first ever 4-year contract in the PWHL. And so that is really fascinating, and because nobody else has done it yet, and like nobody has done it since there. But they picked up Taylor Gerrard and Sidney Bard from Vancouver in their phase 3 signings.
Yeah, I think Detroit's looking pretty solid here. Also Jesse Compher, Britta Salemi, Hannah Bilka, Kayla Barnes. I mean,
Yeah.
we'll get into the teams here, but I'm gonna say it off top here. I just don't know what was going on in Seattle. I mean, there's so many names. Listen, you don't go wrong with Alex Carpenter. Hannah Murphy seems to have a lot of faith in Hannah Murphy, and not that it's not. I don't have anything against Hannah Murphy, but comparative to other players that they could have protected, and knowing that they didn't necessarily have to protect Hannah Murphy right out of the gate, it's just a head scratcher. And again, this is something that we talked about before Seattle and Vancouver came into the league, or as they were coming into the league. How much of this is like really the players were like, whoa, really? I wasn't protected? And how much of it was players perhaps signaling that, I mean, you can do what you want, but I'm not playing here. I don't get a good read, Rachel, on how earnest some of these things are. And that goes back to, again, the first expansion process. Some players seem genuinely surprised, and others, I don't know, seem like they were maybe talking around the issue. That's just my read on things.
Well, and one of the interesting things about this expansion process is the salary transparency that we talked about last week, right? Because we know that for players to move teams. In some of the phases it's a requirement, in some it's just kind of like a no-brainer in terms of a player choosing to move somewhere else. Like they're going to want equal or more money from these other
Yes.
teams, and
Right.
these new teams have to manage an entire salary cap and not just tweaking a salary cap. So that could have a lot to do with it as well. And a player just saying, no, I don't want to move because you can't like guarantee me the money that I'm making here. And that's for the higher paid players, right?
Right.
And some of them have sort of quote unquote earned the right to not be moved, right?
Right. And
So
yeah, we talked about that last week. There has been, speaking of Seattle, which also goes to just the broader, more general conversation, and I know we'll get into this, but not listed, at least not right now, for Detroit is Hillary Knight. But of course, we've
correct.
seen the reports. We saw the signing officially to Vegas, but it seems like if the reports are correct and if they stand and if there isn't anything untoward or that the league has to get involved in, we're hearing that Detroit will also get Hillary Knight.
Yeah, and so Vegas did use their EFO on Hillary Knight. So part one of that is done. And I think the thing that's indicative that the trade part is going to go through is that it's only a 1-year deal, right? So it gives Hillary Knight the flexibility to then renegotiate with Detroit later on for an extended contract. And,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that is a huge indicator there. But I think given that, and if Detroit gets that draft pick, that's going to be a very, very, very good player. And you add that to who else they picked up in phase 2 and phase 3. You have Hayley Scamurra, you have Aerin Ambrose, May Batherson, Kendall Cooper. They picked up a goaltender, a very good one in Nicole Hensley, and Maureen
Yeah.
Murphy and Megan Carter, right? And so technically they have 8 of their 10 slots filled, but really it's 7, knowing what we
Right.
know, right?
Exactly, because we're expecting it will be a sign and trade, and so you're just running
Yeah.
through Vegas. And so again, we have to see if this is officially official, and we have to wait. Well, it seems like forever, especially comparative to how this process is going. But this can't happen until much closer to the draft, Rachel. The
Yes.
official, if it is, well, the sign has already happened, so that, like you said, that part
Yeah.
is done. But the trade, we have to wait a few more days here as we're recording.
Exactly. So I assume it's going to happen again, based on everything that we know that's been out there, but also the 1-year deal just like kind of sealed it for me that that's
Yeah,
what was happening.
and not specific to Hillary Knight, but I did talk in our Slack channel. If you want to be a part of our Slack community, well, you can join the Women's Basketball Roundup, which is our women's basketball newsletter. But we will have a hockey newsletter coming as well. But that's how you get access, whether you're a free subscriber or one of our paid subscribers, you get access to our Slack community. And so we were talking a little bit there, and the 1-year deal, because we saw the same with Knight in Seattle. And I just do wonder, there's a lot of different things to take into account when it comes to the PWHL, but we have seen 1-year deals be a little bit of a play, specifically thinking of the WNBA. Now, a part of that was to do with the collective bargaining agreement, the CBA, Rachel, and we've broken that down, the compare and contrast of CBA negotiations and strategy of players associations and this and that. But again, Hillary Knight, when if/when the sign and trade is done, I wonder if Hillary Knight might be a player that just wants that flexibility. But how much of that is predicated on where the league is? Are they going to stick with 12? I think that's what we are kind of getting. We're getting the notion that they'll stick at 12 for a little bit. So yeah,
Yeah.
I think likely we'll see a renegotiated, if she wants to continue playing, for an extension for a few years. But just want to keep that in the back pocket, right? As this league is growing, I think the stability is something that these players wanted. We've been critical, though, and rightfully so, I would say, that there are things that are still big question marks. And, how much has the league advanced in certain ways versus the other? But a way to have autonomy as a player is through 1-year deals.
Yeah. Yep. And we saw that with the Sirens in particular. We've seen a couple of top players sign 1-year deals and then later
Mm-hmm.
sign longer contracts. We saw that with Sarah Fillier. Casey O'Brien signed
Yep.
a 1-year deal initially, but she got a qualifying offer and was protected in phase one. So, it's definitely a tool that the players are using.
Yeah. All right. So we talked about Detroit. We talked about Vegas because that was the natural progression given what we're
Yep.
expecting with the sign and trade. But let's talk about the other two teams here. Why don't we go and talk about Hamilton and what
Yes.
Megan Duggan has been doing?
Yeah, it's really interesting because they have signed the fewest number of players of the team so far with 6, right? And they used all 5 of their phase 2 slots, but only one of their 3 phase 3 slots here, which I think is interesting in and of itself. But their phase 2 signings packed a punch, right? With Brianne Jenner, Alina Mueller, Nicole Gosling, Emily Clark, and then goaltending Kaylee Osborne, again, breaking the hearts of New York Sirens fans there. But in phase 3, they only picked up Zoe Boyd, a defender, so on a 2-year deal. So I think there probably are some additional negotiations that have taken place behind the scenes, and that they're just kind of waiting for the next phase when it's a more open part of the process to kind of get the deal done. And that seems to be a trend here, just waiting until for existing teams, for them to be able to sign additional players, and then, phase 6 for everybody, including those expansion teams.
Yeah, it's an interesting strategy for sure. Like how much do you want to do upfront versus doing the work a little bit later versus maybe a little bit of a hybrid here. But I
Yeah.
think this is a pretty solid lineup. I mean, honestly, all of the teams, I don't know exactly if they're showing their hand on what they're looking for, but for Hamilton and knowing what I know about Megan Duggan, I mean, these
Yeah.
signings are not surprising to me at all.
No, I mean, it's just very hardworking,
Yep.
like all business kind of players, right?
Yep.
That are going to work well in a system. And I think they'll
Mhm.
work well together.
Yeah.
I think that this is like a really good start to this team for like a team cohesion perspective.
100%. All right. And then we have the dual position here. Troy Ryan doing his work both as a coach and a GM. San Jose, 8 of 10 spots filled so far, Rachel.
Yeah, I think this has been another interesting part of the process. 8 of their 10 filled, like you said. They used all 3 of the phase 3 slots, signing Maggie Connors, Hadley Hartmetz, and Mariah Keppel. And I just think that when you have some of the other players that they got in phase 2 who are a little bit more expensive, you have to kind of fill, right?
Mm.
And they just decided to start filling a little bit earlier in the
Hmm.
process, I think, in a lot of ways, because all of these players are very, very good players, don't get me wrong, but they're not like top tier players that maybe
Yeah.
some of the other teams have gone for, and that's okay. It's
Yeah.
a valid strategy, it's just a
Role
different one.
players. Yeah, role
Yeah.
players for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Tchaikovsky is really interesting here.
Yeah.
As far as, we talk about this in all sports, but what are the opportunities when you go to an expansion team to maybe put a different stamp on your game or have your game open up a little bit here? Tchaikovsky for me stands out to be one of those
Yeah.
players, but so does Corrine Schroeder. I kept saying, Rachel, I just didn't really understand what the rub was in Seattle with Corrine Schroeder because again, Hannah Murphy, solid, great. I mean, had a phenomenal rookie debut, right? And was Hannah Murphy head and shoulders better than Corrine Schroeder? Was Corrine Schroeder head and shoulders better or worse than Hannah Murphy? For me, the answer was no. But it did seem like all things being equal that Seattle was leaning into Hannah Murphy. And, we were able to post the conversation that I had with Megan Turner. And it did seem from, me reading between the lines there that there was going to be a shakeup in goaltending. Some of that's expected when there's a 4-team expansion. And I just got the sense that either Seattle wasn't pleased with Corrine or vice versa, or maybe both.
Yeah, it was funny when Kareem got signed. I was like, man, that's 3 years in a row of wearing just a city jersey without like the team name on. Actually, it's not
Right.
3 in a row, but 3 total, right?
3 total, right.
Yeah, and I was like, "Oh, just give her a logo on the front of her jersey."
Let her stick around. I mean, I still do
Yeah,
really believe in Corrine Schroeder as a goaltender.
yeah.
I think she's right outside probably of that top tier, but she has a lot of potential and she can definitely steal games for teams that are struggling to score. Again, goaltending wasn't the issue in Seattle, but we'll talk about that because we have some things later in the show to talk about when it comes to Seattle. But yeah, that's ultimately what we get here. So anything else that we want to talk about when it comes to phase two specifically, before we really start breaking down what's happening or happened, excuse me, in phase three and what to expect in phase four.
Yeah, I think, yeah, all these teams had a definite strategy going into it, and you could, see how it played out. And some of it is cap related, some of it is, talent related, a little bit of both there. Yeah, I don't think there's any existing team that got decimated so poorly. I mean, you could talk about Seattle and management, but I think this was just how this was going to play out, and that the protection slots kind of did their job in a lot of ways here for those teams. But yeah, I think all of these teams did a good starting look at what their teams are going to end up being.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think you're right here. Okay, so let's talk now about what we know now that phase three is closed, because we also got another round of protections, Rachel, that were happening as we get ready for phase four.
Yeah. So one of the other interesting parts of this process was that there were players in phase two who were on expiring contracts who rejected FPOs.
Yeah, yeah.
So what that meant is that they had to sign in phase three somewhere. It had to be with their either like their existing team or another team, but they had to sign. And every single one of those players signed in their existing teams, which meant that those existing teams had to then protect them in
Hmm.
phase three. And so for a team like Vancouver, that burned two of their three protection slots. Now, would they have protected these players anyway? Probably in Izzy Daniel and Jen Gardner. I would say Jen Gardner for sure.
Yeah,
Izzy Daniel, I would say probably, right?
yeah.
So I don't know that it would have changed it entirely, but it did kind of paint them into a corner with them only being able to add one more player to that list, which was Hannah Miller, which I think was the right answer for them.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that's a really good point. And again, we talked about this specifically with what Kara was talking about and was like, if I could bring the band back together, I'd do it in a heartbeat. And also, Kara's goal is to, I think, get as much consistency in the roster to maybe then I mean, I think it's maybe telling that if the roster is something that she really liked, I mean, she built it, so yeah, I mean, I think it's safe to say that she liked
Yeah,
it.
right. Little
But
little
then
bias there.
yeah, a little biased. But then, and knowing that she has said, Rachel, that the main priority is to get the roster together before thinking about a coaching staff. I wonder what that says about one, what didn't really work out with Brian Adolski. We talked about that in the last episode. If there was something bigger or greater, we didn't get any inkling of that. It was just left at it didn't work out.
Right.
But the reason I'm kind of bringing this up is because I think perhaps this roster was expecting a little bit better, and maybe perhaps they think if they find the right coach that can be um, better at utilizing the roster or empowering and motivating the roster or understanding the roster, that they'll be in a better spot. And I think that's interesting. I think that's an interesting kind of implied tell here, right?
Yeah, there's that. And then you also couple that with the unrelated but somehow associative point that Vancouver was the last team to have a player snagged in this expansion process. So
Mm.
I don't know. I just find that an interesting coincidence. It's 100% a coincidence, I think, but
Hmm.
I just feel that that kind of dovetails together a little nicely. But yeah, a real, I think, telling thing about what Karamori is doing in Vancouver for sure. I'm also intrigued by what Boston is doing
Mm.
there. So Susanna Tapani, 100% makes sense. You know, they re-signed her, and that burned one of their slots. And then they gave a qualifying offer to Abby Newhook, and then protected Shea Maloney. So again, all of that makes sense to me. Could you have made an argument about somebody besides Shea Maloney? Yeah, but I don't disagree with this call either.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Boston and Vancouver seem to be in proper run it back mode. Ottawa's interesting for me.
Yeah.
Ottawa, I think, is maybe a little bit of a hybrid in ways, and I know you kind of comped them to New York in some ways.
Yeah, so each of those two teams really only used protection slots. Like they didn't re-sign anybody moving forward. You know, they Ottawa gave out two qualifying offers, but there was no like existing player contract extension there. And you know, I think both of those teams, and I would say Ottawa in particular, but they protected very important players, right? You know, we talked about the Sirens losing was essentially like a line's worth of players, you know, with Churchkowski and Wheeler and O'Neill gone, right? And they had protected forwards in the first round, and then forwards got snagged, right? And so they moved on to defenders in the second round entirely, and you know kept half of their decor, which is huge for them, right? But you know, Ottawa, I think, started out a little bit more diversified in their protections with Gwyneth Phillips and Savalainen, Rebecca Leslie. So Ottawa used it, their qualifying offers on two very important players who I think got better as the season went on in Katarova and Wozniewicz. I think most notably scoring her first professional goal with Ottawa in overtime to win a game. So, you know, I think that it's both teams are doing things in a really smart way. And I would suspect that both of them have pre-negotiated contracts that they're just waiting for the right phase to sign for other players. But they haven't like signed any extensions or used any of the tools like to burn slots on things that they don't find absolutely necessary. And I appreciate that from both those teams.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. We'll see how it works out. Okay, so teams we haven't talked really at all about. Let's go to Minnesota and Montreal.
Yeah, Minnesota used some of those extensions, right? But still hasn't gone over the six players here yet. But I think you know the biggest question here is about Kendall Coyne Schofield, who's still available technically, but again, she's one of those players that have earned the right to play where they want to play, right? So I don't think there's any issue there. If she's playing hockey, she's going to play it in Minnesota. That is
Think
for
so.
sure.
Yeah.
But I do like that they've gone with you know their key players here, right? In their phase one protection, Maddie Rooney, Kelly Panic, and Taylor Heisey, that checked out, and then they signed a couple of extensions in phase three, which then required them to be protected. Grace Zumwinkel was one of the players they had to extend in order to keep her because of that phase two versus phase three rule. Then Lee Steckline, again, like an invaluable part of their decor, and Sidney Moran. So I think they've done a good job. It'll be interesting to see what they do in the later phases.
Yeah, I am completely biased. Lee Steckline, first of all, a friend of the
Yeah.
pod, or you know, friend of our different podcasts here, but also just a great human, great hockey player. And so, you know, with Lee, every year I'm like, oh, thank you for what you've given, and also please don't go. Like, please don't leave us, because she's retired before, and it dang near broke me. She confirmed that she is good with us calling her the Becky Sauerbrunn of women's hockey, and I have no reason to dismiss that title. But yeah, the world needs more Lee Steckline. I stand on that.
Absolutely.
All right.
Absolutely.
What about Montreal?
Yeah, so Montreal, I think, yeah, had a really tough job here, again, with a championship team.
Yeah.
And also, looking at the salary transparency here, they lost several high paid players. So it gives them a little bit more flexibility in their cap this year, I think. And so when you look at their phase 3 work that they did, Maggie Flaherty had to be extended, again, as part of that rule there. And then they had 2 more protection spots, and they went with Katie Tabin and Lena Lungbaum. So
Yeah.
both very smart choices, I think, especially because you look at their phase 1 protection, they had no defenders. Now they added 2 to the mix, and that was important for them.
Yeah, 100%. We already kind of wrapped in Vancouver here. Toronto is a team that, especially with Hamilton being so close, we were wondering what, all of this expansion and signing windows would look like. But I think, these names, especially for me, Callie Flanagan and Natalie Spooner, I especially with Spooner, and we talked about it on the last episode. Is she going anywhere else? I don't think
No,
so.
no, not at all. But it is interesting to see that like they did protect her, whereas Minnesota didn't sign an extension for Kendall Coyne and protect her, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's just a strategy thing and an assumption that they didn't need to protect Kendall Coyne Schofield, but Toronto felt like they did need to protect Natalie Spooner, and I find that intriguing.
Yeah. Along with Flanagan and Spooner, Emma Gentry, a forward for Toronto, is kept. And then we have Seattle. Now, Seattle, quite the exodus, especially after just one season. And that is very different than their main comp, which of course is Vancouver, right?
Right.
Very different. Very, very different. And we'll talk about the bench bosses and some of the shakeup there in a little bit here. But so much leaving. So what about what Seattle is able to keep?
Yeah, I do think that there was going to be a lot of upheaval in Seattle, no matter what, like given the results and the fact that there was like a shakeup up top with management, unlike Vancouver, right? So you look at this and you look at the core that they've held on to. I mean, it looks like the right core here of what you want to hold on to, and then add completely different players into the mix and get a fresh start, right? So they had protected Alex Carpenter, Hannah Murphy, Anna Wilgren in phase 1. Phase 3, they had to give the extension to Julia Gosling, again, because of the rule, but I would have protected her anyway, to be honest. And Michaela Grant-Mentis, key part of their forward group there, and Danielle Serdachny, who's like one of the most dynamic players on the team.
Yeah, I like this. Given
Yeah,
if what left wasn't going to stay regardless, then this is solid. And
yeah,
who do you get to play up with them? I get the sense though, just from what we're looking at with Seattle, that they're going to be a young team. So is that good? Is that bad? What does that look like? I guess we'll find out. But I think that means it's a lot of opportunity. I mean, Julia Gosling was phenomenal.
right.
Had a great hockey season, which included, of course, the Olympics. Michaela Grant-Mentis, aka Bucky, also friend of Black Rosie Media. I just, I continue to like her game. She finds a way to continue to add value, even if the role is changing, and everything from, what line she's on to, if she's centering or playing wing. And there's value in having a player like that that absolutely can still score at a high level. So I still have questions And you play the hand that's dealt, I guess is kind of what I'm saying here.
Right.
All right, Rachel. So next, and again, as of our recording, this will start Sunday, and it's a quick window here. But let's talk about phase 4.
Right. So by the end of phase 4, all the expansion teams have to get up to 10 players. So, like we said, Detroit has 3 slots left, Hamilton 4, and Las Vegas and San Jose each have 2. And they can sign from free agents who are not on their earlier phase negotiation list, which is like a whole other thing. The teams had to submit 10 players that they were going to negotiate with. And so now it's 20 per team because we've had 2 separate lists of 10 players. And then unprotected players on existing teams that own the rights to them. So that's who's available right here. And then when players who are currently under contract sign with an expansion team in phase 4, they have to sign for a salary equal or greater than their original contract, which is, again, is something that I just talked about in terms of affecting the strategy here, right? And who might move and who might not, right? And so I think that you look at that and it is a little limiting, but there's a ton of available players here.
Yes. And so thinking of that, who are the players that you think are most intriguing, and perhaps is the expansion teams that are still available, Rachel?
Yeah, so if you look at kind of who's still available here, I think the glaring point that Detroit still doesn't have a goalie, and we talked about it last week in terms of maybe somebody's looking to the draft to get their top goaltender, but with Vancouver protecting Aerin Mashmeyer, that does make Kristen Campbell available, and she was not protected. And so could Detroit sign her as like maybe she'll be the backup goaltender for us, but if she has to be the starter, she has the experience and can do it.
Yeah, and again, was that what Seattle was doing? Not sure. Perhaps because that kind of looks like how it played out. But that's really interesting. Where goaltenders are valued moving on, including in the entry draft, is going to be really interesting to me, Rachel.
Yeah, I mean, because the other goaltenders that are available right now, Sandra Abstrater, Elaine Chuli, Sania Hola, Abby Levy, for instance. I mean, all of them are kind of labeled as backups right now. And so if anybody is going to sign a second goaltender in this phase, I would be surprised, other than maybe Campbell getting signed by Detroit. But, surprise me, teams.
Surprise me. Now where do these backdoor deals that you've been alluding to fall into play? Is that phase 4, phase 5? What are you thinking here?
It's phase 5 for sure. So for players signing with existing teams like Abby Rock, for instance, I think she's going to re-sign with Montreal in phase 5.
Yeah. And it sounds like, the assumption, and I agree with, is that Kendall Coyne Schofield may be holding out, but will also eventually end up back in Minnesota.
Yeah. And I think it's possible that Ashton Bell winds up back in Vancouver, but again, we'll see what happens there with her. But I think there's definitely possibilities. I think this is like where Ottawa and the Sirens are going to kind of click in here. I think Denisa Krishova is probably going to return to New York, but again, you never know, right?
Yeah.
But I think like players of that caliber are the ones that are going to stick around and they're going to sign with their existing teams.
Yeah, definitely. I think these are players that, I don't. They're not necessarily the big name players. They are not. They're a little bit more than role players. They're kind of in that, above average plus, maybe. I don't know what that looks like, but these are players that can make a massive impact, that you don't want to necessarily lose them, but they're not at the top of the table. And then also, what's best for them as they kind of see the landscape changing? Do you see the writing on the wall? Is it better to stick with what you know, or to explore something new, or do you want to match up with someone, and is there a deal to be made? So I think that's going to be really interesting. interesting because I think you don't really have to look any further than the last Walter Cup final, all of them, I would argue. And those are the players that can make an impact when it comes to what teams are able to do down the stretch. So I think, it's going to be interesting to see how things shake out. All right, we're going to close our show going to, as we talked about earlier, as I mentioned earlier, bench bosses and above. So we did get some coaching hires. Some are internal. Some are coming from other places in women's hockey. And then, we have a little bit of a family affair also, not in the same organization like the Seattle Kraken like to do, which is a whole other thing. But we have another Rayom coming to the PWHL.
We do. Pascal is going to be the head coach for the Toronto Scepters. Of course, the brother of Manon Rayom, who is the Detroit GM. That's fascinating to me. But, he does have like the coaching experience, more on the men's side, but the experience nonetheless.
Right. And, this is something that we continue to talk about. I did ask Madison Packer about this a little bit when I talked to her on our CBS podcast, We Need to Talk Now. She really got into it with Emily Clark and some of the salary transparency. But, is it important to have women's hockey experience when coming to women's hockey? And part of the reason that I asked specifically Madison Packer that is because she won a title in college with one of the best coaches in women's hockey, right? So the standard is pretty high for what Madison Packer knows. But also won a professional title with a coach that had junior men's hockey experience and was coming to women's hockey for the first time in Chad Wiseman, but learned really quick. I mean, the Chad Wisemans, of the world, the Colton Orrs, I think those are exceptions to what we've seen in recent trend. But then you also look at, what happened with O'Rourke in Seattle. But is women's hockey experience enough? Because Brian Nadolski didn't work out in Vancouver, and he's coached at the Olympic level. Now, granted, I think it is fair to say that the Chinese national team, as the hosts, they aren't a competitive federation. So there's that, right? So with a grain of salt there. But how much does women's hockey experience matter? Perhaps it's conditional, but I think you and I are on the same page in that we'd rather see it than not.
Yeah, you look at the existing coach list right now. There's 12 teams, 10 of whom have coaches at the moment. 7 of the 10 are men. And so it does not look great for a women's league to have it that way. But you're right in saying there are men coaches who have been successful with women's hockey. I just think you don't know until you know in these circumstances.
Yeah, and that point I just want to stick with, I'm sorry, Rachel, because it's the you don't know until you know that usually men in all situations. We just
yes.
happen to be talking about women's hockey, but you can copy paste in anything. They are given the benefit of the doubt where women have to be exemplar, in order to just be given the one chance. And so having that as having that be something that is very much a societal trend, it's what makes it difficult to see a women's league perhaps not giving opportunity to women. Now, it was interesting. I don't know that I agree with Madison Packer on this, and it's also something Gino Auriemma has said, and I thought a very flippant way. But, is there a conversation that there aren't more women hockey, specifically head coaches, because women don't want to be women hockey head coaches? I don't know that I buy that.
No, I don't buy that at all. It's just hard to see the feeder system, right? And but there's also like a very interesting parallel with men's hockey in one important way, I think, is that when you look at college coaches, NCAA men's college coaches have really cushy gigs, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they get paid very well as a general rule in the top programs, right? And they don't
Mm-hmm.
really have incentive to leave because of the security of the jobs is
Yep.
much higher. If you have success, your job security is higher. In the pro game, job security is much lower. So for the top college coaches, some of whom are women, much like with the men, to leave those cushy jobs, like the coach at
Why?
Denver, for instance, the men's coach at
Yeah.
Denver, he's never leaving, right?
Why? Yeah.
Why? Why uproot your family and your life for a job that may not work out?
And has said as much. He said as much. you know so yeah, I think that's another interesting piece of this, because you look at like Katie King, is she leaving? Julie Chu, is she
Mm-hmm.
leaving? And that's
Caroline
U
Ouellette.
Sports. Yeah, exactly. I mean, is an assistant, in the PWHL, so there's that. But I just think it's the you're right, the ecosystem, the landscape is different. And I don't think it's fair to always put only on women, that because of whatever their family unit and dynamic is, that's why they'll make these choices. Because you do have, I just go back to women's basketball, you have women head coaches who take opportunities, and they do have a family, but you know what, they have in their family a supportive family that's like, listen, this is what you do. And if you are being considered and being asked to step into one of the best roles as one of the best people that does what you do, we're going with you. like,
Yeah.
we're going
Yeah.
with you.
Yeah. And, I think, to some of the points you were making, there is this added layer of societal patriarchal expectation of women to prioritize stability in their lives over ambition, right?
Mhm.
And so
Mhm.
by taking, albeit a risky ambitious move, to move, say, from college to the pro game, or to move from, say, a minor league men's team to a women's pro team, at the top level, I think there is risk to it, and there's criticism associated with taking that risk, because you're
Mhm.
uprooting your life, and people see women uprooting their life for ambition as a negative. Some people do.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so,
As if, husbands and men can't pack boxes just as well as women, but
I
that's a
know.
woman's job. But
Yeah.
then lifting the boxes is the men. Explain yourself. You make no sense. But anyway, we're not going to go into that deep dark societal cesspool pit, because we know it doesn't make sense. Let's move on to what we do know as far as some other changes slash hires, and they're both women. They're both women.
Yay.
Yay for the women. Molly Engstrom. That's a throwback name for a lot
I
of WoHo
know.
fans. If you know, you know. And we actually mentioned Molly Engstrom in passing with a bit of women's hockey lore. I had no idea that we would then be talking about her in earnest as the new head coach in Detroit.
I know, absolute crazy. And again, in our side Slack, and I posted it on Blue Sky, but Molly Engstrom like threw a hit on Megan Duggan in the first season of the NWHL and got her
Brutal.
suspended, which is like, oh, how times have changed and not
Oh
changed
my
all at once,
goodness.
right?
Oh my goodness. Wow. Yeah, that was wild. That was
Yeah.
a wild situation. I really don't like hitting in hockey. And there's just some times where you're like, I don't condone this. And also, what
Wow.
did I just see? Like, what did I just see?
And I was there. I was literally at
Oh,
that game. And I remember it because everybody was like, "Oh, this is a pro league here." Like it was definitely like a pro women's hockey defining moment in that first year.
100%.
Yeah.
But anyway, that notwithstanding, Molly Engstrom, I remember when one of the first coaching roles that she got, because if I'm not mistaken, Rachel, she's also been in the USA hockey system, I think at the
Yeah.
U level on the women's side. But she was an assistant at St. Cloud State for a little bit in the NCAA, took the head coaching role in Maine, which Maine has been a competitive team on the women's. Well, I'm not actually so sure how they do on the men's side, but certainly for the women's side, they've had their run here, and is now making this move to the pros. Molly Engstrom, I've had a chance to talk with her when she left the NWHL after the season 2 salary cuts. Got an exclusive with her, and her hockey mind is up there. And to see someone like a Molly Engstrom, who clearly is not to be trifled with on the ice, but to be able to see how her hockey mind, having international experience with USA Hockey as a player, as an Olympian, having international experience after playing in the NWHL, going to play in Sweden, having international experience as a bench boss, in the youth system, for USA Hockey, having experience in the NCAA, both as an assistant, as a head coach. This seems like the pedigree that you would want for a PWHL head coach.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And I think that, sometimes your controversial physical players make the best coaches. And I think it's because they see the game in a different way, that they see play away from the puck in a way that's more significant than maybe like your high skill players do. And I just find that to be a really interesting trend of, physical people. I mean, some with mixed skill, right? But like, you look at some of the NHL head coaches that have found success, they were very good, skilled players, but also like they were very physical players who worked really hard away from the puck. And I can see that happening in women's hockey as well. I think it's a similar sort of thing.
Yeah, I'm very eager to see Molly Engstrom back in the fold here at the pro level. And then we have a hire from within. And I have questions about this, but not because of Bumstead herself. And so let's just talk about it. Christine Bumstead is announced as the next head coach for the Seattle Torrent, was an assistant under Coach O'Rourke in the inaugural season. And here's the important part, because I think and understandably so, when you say you want to have an extensive process or process, depending on where you're from, to hire a new head coach, and you really want to make sure you're casting the net wide, is also something that we hear. Then to hire internally, it's like, okay, but is that really what we did? But here's what I will say for Torrent fans. We've talked about this before, Rachel. And if you listen to my interview with Megan Turner, I say it directly to Megan Turner. The team could not score. That's an exaggeration, but is it? I don't know. The team had difficulty scoring 5-on-5, but not on the power play. And who, Rachel, pray tell, was head of the power play? Oh, their new head coach.
Right. And, I think when you have an internal hire like this, and you go through the interview process, I think you have to be able to sell yourself in that what you would have done differently if you were the head coach, right? So you have to kind of promote what you did well, what your job was, and that you did it well, and then explain what you would have done differently as a head coach. And it seems like she did that in this process, right?
Yeah, it seems like she did that. And again, in the conversation I had with Megan, we've summarized it here. It's available if you haven't checked it out. It did seem as though, and Megan talked about this also in the GM, roundups and media availability that was facilitated through the league, through the PWHL. It's talking to a lot of people. Again, that's kind of what you hear in sports. We talk to all, because you don't want to put it necessarily on just the front office, or especially if it's coming from players. I think that's a way of speaking. And we've already talked about Megan Turner kind of stays in that lane, right? Of kind of giving the speak that will look good in a quote in an article, but not really tell much about what's going on with the organization. I mean, whatever. It is what it is. It's fine. But I did get the sense from some of the more technical questions that I was able to ask her that they knew. Or that she knew what they wanted to impact. She talked about moving the puck. She talked about, being able to, yes, move the puck, but also movement in general, and I guess you could say pace, right? And things of that nature. And so again, if that was working on the power play, now granted it's an advantage, but what was it about the power play that just couldn't transition to 5-on-5? And if you had someone that was able to be the architect of a part that worked last year, then yeah, especially if you want to get that head coach in place before the draft, you want to signal to the players that are here, hey, perhaps this is not reporting, this is just me, providing a hypothetical. Hey, we got your feedback. We heard what was working, what wasn't working. These are the elements that you liked. And this is a person that was either involved in those elements, or we think can bring that to, to an elevated level. So I'm very interested to see how this is going to work. Bumstead has made some history throughout her time. I mean, let's be honest, and this is no shade to any of the women, but it's not hard to make history as a woman who is a coach in hockey. We're still there. And when you have someone that is a pioneer, a trailblazer, is able to be successful at multiple levels, that I think is also indicative of what a league like the PWHL not only should be able to, just reward Rachel, but they can actually create that pipeline. And so this hire internal from Bumstead, not that you should hire just for, these moral victories, but we know it's done. We know it's done on the men's side. Like, let's not act like this is a woman thing. I don't think this is a moral victory kind of thing here. I do think there are a lot of hockey reasons to hire Bumstead, and I think it bodes well for what you want people to see when they come to the PWHL, right? Most people, unless they are coming out of maybe a second retirement, they want to know that there is upward mobility. And so this also signals to other coaches, regardless of if they're a woman, a man, non-binary, how young they are, how much experience that they had, that you can get a start here and continue and progress on. I think, I don't like that we have a coach GM thing, but having someone go from a coaching role, and keep a coaching role, but also be able to see Troy Ryan hold an elevated level in the hierarchy as a GM, that also signals upward mobility. And I think those things are also good. Now, the question mark or the asterisk, where we're keeping our finger on the pulse, Rachel, for everything that we've said, is, are those opportunities going to be given to women in a women's hockey league?
Right. And I think that will be the ultimate question. And I think where we keep an eye on that is all these assistant coaching slots, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because that allows these women to have opportunities to prove themselves and move up the ladder, much like Christine did, right? So I think that is where the tell will be. If this league can woo coaches away from the college game
Mm-hmm.
in order, and give them assistant coaching jobs in order to move up. And is it assistant coaches in these college jobs where they know the head coach isn't leaving, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the only way for them to move up is to either change schools, which is those top elite schools are rare opportunities, or take assistant jobs in the PWHL. And to me, that's the pipeline that makes the most sense, is assistant coaches that are tapped out in terms of how far they can go up in their existing programs. And the only way to make an impact is to jump to the pro game.
And again, we've seen that. I think it's more of a leapfrog, I would say, for junior hockey, boys junior hockey assistant coaches getting PWHL head coaching roles. Another thing I think is going to be interesting, and I actually talked to Jana Hefford about this. We were talking more about officials and the on-ice officials, but how is this going to be a pipeline where former PWHL players. So not just former women's hockey players, because we've seen that. I mean, we've talked about Megan Duggan, we've talked about Megan Turner. We also, we have some precedents there. We have also Madison Packer, who I've mentioned on the show. We have Blake Bolden. Those two went the broadcast route. But are we going to see former PWHL players take on PWHL coaching and staff roles?
This is a thing that's just going to make me feel old, honestly. But it's good. It's a very good thing. Yeah, I would be curious to see who goes into coaching for sure, and if they skip the college route, right? Instead of leaving the league and going back to a college to coach, as some players have done. Is anybody going to skip that and become an assistant coach directly with PWHL teams? I think, Hilary Knight is a very intriguing option for that when she retires.
I don't know if I see her going the coaching route. I think she might go media.
I mean, I do too, but for me personally, I would like to see her behind the bench. Like, whether she does or not, like, that's on her, and do what you want, live your life, you've earned it. But I would love to see her behind the bench for sure.
Well, she might be behind the bench. Will she have a mic, or will she have a rolled up piece of paper? That is to be determined. But either way, Rachel, listen, we know we have another phase, another 2 phases coming up, and then you are going to get ready to be boots on the ground when it comes to the entry draft and the awards that's happening in Detroit. If you see Molly Engstrom, tell her we got to have her on the pod sometime soon. But what an exciting time. So if you're not already following Black Rosie Media and at Even Strength, go ahead and do that. You can check out the show notes. We have all of our links for Rachel and I personally, as well as the show. We do have our own Blue Sky account. We do have a TikTok account. And of course, you can just follow Black Rosie Media. But Rachel, we are looking forward to your coverage, and we can't wait to talk a little bit more about what we know about phase 4 and 5 on our next episode of At Even Strength. Until then, safe travels to you, Rachel. Thanks for tuning in, everyone, and drop a comment below. Is there a player that you are looking forward to where they are going to sign? Let us know. And of course, our next episode, we will be focused on the entry draft. Is it the KK Harvey show? Can someone else take that number 1 spot? Is Madison Packer right in that some of the murmurs that Vancouver might trade that pick? What is going to happen? Where is Hilary Knight going to play? All of that coming up on the next episode of At Even Strength. For Rachel Donner, Erica L. Ayala signing out. We'll catch you on the next episode. Peace out, everybody.